This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey there, welcome to the show. For those joining us for the first time, know that this is the year 2023 and you're watching or listening to Dune Talk, the official podcast of DuneNewsNet.com. This is where we cover everything Dune, often with a regular crew of experts and other times with special guests for interviews. On this episode, we're excited to speak with the author of A Masterpiece in Disarray, David Lynch's Dune, An Oral History. This brand new book explores in incredible depth production and lasting legacy of the Dune movie that premiered in theaters almost 40 years ago. This is Marcus, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Mark and Simon, both longtime fans of that 1984 movie.
Hi, Mark here from DuneInfo. Excited to talk to Max about his book.
Simon here, super excited. If you've been listening or watching the show, you know I am one of the few people on this show. Johnny, that goes out to you. I love the 84 movie. I don't care what anyone says. It's a guilty pleasure, but it's also what inspired me to go to film school. So can't wait to dive in.
Oh, bless you. Yes. And I'm Max Evry. This is the sound of my voice, which is also my weapon of choice.
Yeah, and Max, great to have you on the show. So you've worked in film journalism, I think in one capacity or another since 2005. And people may have seen your work on places like IGN, MTV, /film. So yeah, welcome to Dune Talk. Wanted to give you the opportunity to share with our viewers and listeners just a little bit more about who you are and what you do when you're not writing a huge 500-page book about Dune.
Oh, well, I've been writing 500-page books about Dune forever. You know, I can just churn them out. Yes, I've been a movie journalist / bon vivant for a long time, based in Brooklyn, New York. And I've gotten to do all sorts of fun things in my career. I've done like dozens of set visits to big movies. I've interviewed lots of directors and movie stars and stuff. And yeah, and after a while, like that, you know, kind of runs its course, and then you kind of want to go to the next thing. So yeah, I wanted to do a book. I've also recently been branching out into audio commentaries for Blu-rays for companies like Kino Lorber and Arrow and Via Vision, and that's been really fun. I actually just produced my first Blu-ray special feature, so yeah, it's been a joy for the last 2 or 3 years to start instead of writing little 300 or 400 word capsule news pieces about a movie. I'm doing really in-depth, highly researched stuff, and getting to, I'm trying to avoid the use of the word deep dive. It's kind of overused, but I'm diving deep into movie stuff, into movie goop.
When I saw the size of the book, I'm like, this is a textbook. It's not even a book. It's a full textbook. If any professor out there wants to teach Dune, just the 84 movie, we should use your book.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want people to be intimidated by it at all. Like, just, if you're listening to this and you're sort of on the fence about it, just know, like, I did not write the book academically, I really tried to make the book entertaining, but also it's very segmented. So like everything has sort of subsections on subsections, and you can jump around and, really kind of, focus on the stuff. If you think special effects are a snooze, just skip that. If you just want to read about Toto, there's plenty of Toto in there. So yeah. And I know that Mark just wrote a lovely review for Dune Newsnet, and he kind of said a similar thing, like that it's that it has an accessibility to it, even though even though there's stuff in there that you might not be interested in, it's there for the people who are.
Yeah, all bases are covered in the book. So any aspect of Lynch's Dune, if you're interested, go buy the book. Highly recommended.
Yeah, and Max, of course, since you're a first-time guest, we want to know your Dune story. What was it that brought you into this universe created by Frank Herbert?
Well, my dad was a huge fan. My dad, Ron, he read, I think, all the books up through 4 or 5. And he really recommended it to me when I was in middle school. And at the same time, I think I taped the I didn't realize it was the TV version, the Alan Smithy version of the film. I taped that off the Sci-Fi Channel, and that was my first exposure. And then so I started reading the book and watching the Alan Smithy kind of simultaneously. And it's interesting to do that because so much of the book is interpreted literally throughout the film. It's very true to the source material, except when it isn't. And then and I didn't know until years later that there was a shorter cut that's actually got David Lynch's name on it. And I watched that one and I was like, oh, this is so much more entertaining than that sort of bastardized TV version. I mean, the TV version has great stuff in it because I think they just cobbled it together from a rough cut or something, but they had no template. They didn't, there's scenes that are in the wrong order. There's shots that shouldn't be. There's shots from the end that they put at the beginning just to patch holes, and it's just a total botch job. And then of course watching the Spice Diver version while I was researching this book, that was a revelation too, because that's that is my definitely preferred recipe for this movie, the Spice Diver. I did.
Great. Well, we have a bunch of burning questions for you, Max. So let's go ahead and dive into a masterpiece in disarray. Mark, since starting your site, Dune Behind the Scenes in the 90s, you yourself have done quite some research into Lynch's movie, and as mentioned, you've written a review. Just before you kick off your questions for Max, what was your overall reaction?
Yeah, absolutely enjoyed the book from start to finish. There's been a lot of unanswered questions for Lynch's Dune. It's been sorely overlooked in film history. Managed to cobble together various bits of information over the decades from magazines or from cast and crew I've contacted online. But this is the first time that we've got, I think, pretty definitive version of the story of Lynch's Dune, from its inception through to all the way through its filming, through to its very rocky reception and its lasting legacy. So yeah, I can highly recommend the book to especially any fans of Lynch's Dune. But if you're a fan of Lynch, fan of filmmaking, or just Dune in general, this will be a perfect stocking stuffer. Although you'll need a big stocking.
Yeah, no, it's a doorstop, and I've told this to Mark a few times. It's a little embarrassing, but while I was writing the book, my sort of North Star was, will Mark Bennett read this and learn something he didn't already know? That was my goal.
You certainly succeeded on that. The cast revelation, because you got the 82 cast list, you got your hands on that by some witchcraft, and that alone was worth the book, I think.
Yeah, and it's and what Mark said is true. Is it's definitely for Dune fans and for Dune 84 fans, but it's even if you knew almost nothing about Lynch's Dune, it is a very in-depth look at the filmmaking process on a huge epic film. And I don't know if a lot of books have really delved this deep into what it's like to mount such a huge production. I mean, this movie cost, the figures I read are anywhere between $37 million and $55 million in 1984 dollars. So, I think it would have been at least $150 million production now. I've been reporting on this industry for so long, and I've watched the blockbuster movie become increasingly more and more homogenous, more just like bland and inoffensive and 4-quadrant oriented. And I look at a movie like David Lynch's Dune, and I'm like, wow, how did this get through the system? Like, even in its compromised form, it's so strange and wonderful and and exciting, and it tickles your corneas with its visuals. It's a really amazing film.
So was that what it inspired you to write the book on Lynch's Dune? Was it from a filmmaking aspect, or was it that you felt there was something missing in the history of Lynch's Dune in particular?
Well, the book had a really weird, windy road, and I don't think it would have come out as good as it did if it wasn't at a really supportive company like 1984 Publishing, because my original assignment, when I pitched it to them, and and they did my contract or whatever, it was supposed to be like 150 pages.
You just went over a little bit.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be done in, I think, 7 or 8 months. What's great is, like, if I'd been forced to turn in something at 7 or 8 months, it would have been garbage. Like, it would have been, I think, a worthless book. But that extra year and change really made a difference, because it takes a long time to cultivate talent. It's a big ask, because it's like they're not contractually obligated to promote this movie anymore. They have nothing really to gain, except if they talk to me, it's because they loved David, is because they cared about the movie and they worked really hard on it and they wanted it to be good. And I think it speaks to the movie and the legacy of the movie, that so many people were willing to give me their time. But it took time to find people. It's like being a detective. You gotta you can't just there's no one-stop shop for finding access to people, and some people I had to approach 3 or 4 different ways. The real trick was just like, if I didn't get a no, then I continued to try to worm my way in as genially as possible. But yeah, and of course, by the time the book was done, it was actually closer to 700 pages. And I didn't know that while I was writing it, because I was writing it in Word. And so Word pages are different from book pages. So like the draft I turned in Word was 400 and something pages. But when they spread it out and laid it out, it was like 700. And I was embarrassed. I was like, nobody going to read a 700-page book. I was like, what do I think I am, James Michener? After I thought I was done, I then took another, whatever it was, few weeks to just go through and really be, just like a scalpel, just like slash, like anything that reeked of filler, I just cut it. And the book is so much better for it. I think it's a much more entertaining book. It's a much more informative book, because it's like everything that was really important to me stayed in there. To me, like, that's the whole point of writing a book like this now, because it's like, what is the legacy of this film? What is the footprint that it's left? And it's like, because it has this perception of being this horrible disaster, but I mean, in going through all these years, the fans and their feelings towards the film is just like, oh no, there's a lot of people who love this movie, like a lot. It's like the Richard Nixon silent majority.
Yeah, we realized that last year when me and Garen, that's not on the show, and Marcus went to a convention in Utah last year, and I was shocked. I mean, I've always said I love the 84 movie, but how many people were like, no, I love the 84 movie. And also, it wasn't people like our age. We had younger people being like, no, it means a lot to me. Like, so I work at Best Buy, and I have a name tag that says Muad'Dib. They let me get away with that. So, and someone was like, "Oh my God, is that your real name?" I'm like, "No, my real name's Paul." They got it, right? Like totally. And they're like, so I showed it to my son. I showed the 84 movie, and her son was like 20 something, loved the 84 movie. He's like, "It's insane." He's like, and nothing against Denis Villeneuve's movie, but he's like, it was just slower. The 84 movie is just like action packed all the way through. And for a movie that's going to be 40 years old next year, it's an impressive movie. Like people talk crap about it all the time because I feel like it's so easy to pick on it. But some of the stuff they did, and especially when you read your book and you know some of the behind the scenes stuff, it's incredible that it just came out just overall.
Yeah, and I know Simon, you were surprised by some of the things you read early in the book.
I was. So Mark kind of hinted at that. The 82 casting. I was like, what? And I try to like visualize it. I was like, nope. But then I was talking to my fiance about a certain superstar that could have been a young Paul Atreides. She's like, he would have been the hot then back in 82. Do you want to talk more about the craziness of the 82 casts?
Yeah, I think that the person I'm guessing you're referring to is Mr. Tom Cruise.
Yep, Mr. Mission Impossible himself.
Yeah, it's hard to picture a well-known dyslexic getting through words like Kwisatz Haderach and Lisan Al Gaib.
Audiobook.
Audiobook. Yeah.
It was probably like 14 cassettes back then.
Yeah. And it's funny, and Everett McGill actually says that Tom did have some difficulty with the language, and and Sean Young said like he just kind of wasn't on his game when he did his screen test. But I mean, I think he got very close. I think it was between him and Val Kilmer, and then Kyle was like the dark horse that came in at the last minute and usurped it from both of those guys. But at the time, in 82, Risky Business hadn't come out. All the Right Moves hadn't come out. Certainly not Top Gun, and the Tom Terrific that we know today. He was just another up and comer. And and I think he would have been an interesting choice, and it would have been. And I think honestly, I think Tom was a more interesting actor back then, because people forget, like before he did the Mission Impossibles and the Top Gun, it's like, if you watch Risky Business, like he's almost like a proto Dustin Hoffman or something. Like he has like a strange energy to him. He's not just a jock. He's not just like a pretty boy. He's like he's got some. There's a lot of neurosis to the character in Risky Business, and of course, and then he went on. He worked with Martin Scorsese on Color of Money, and he worked with Kubrick. I mean, he worked with Sidney Lumet. He's worked with some really amazing directors, and he is a solid actor. He's a solid actor. So I think that pairing would have been interesting. Val Kilmer, I find him a tougher pill to swallow, just because I think he projects that kind of heroic persona, and he would have been great as the Muad'Dib of it all. But I don't know if I see him as the innocent prince of Paul, and I don't know if he's got that in him. I mean, maybe at the time, maybe he was when he was a little younger, he could have done it. But I mean, like they said, Rafaela says in one of the archive quotes, that they tested him like 7 times just to try to. They were trying to like kind of convince themselves that he was a good choice for Paul, and really strong actor. Really, obviously was going to be a movie star. But I don't know. I like Kyle. I think Kyle is a great choice for Paul, and and obviously some of the other almost wars for the cast are very interesting as well. And you get all the dirt in the book.
I mean, of course, now we think of Chalamet as Paul, but Kyle will always be Paul, you know. And if you look at Kyle, he's kind of a hybrid of Tom and Val in a weird little way. So yeah, and I just love the story also how Kyle got the role, and you know, being from the Pacific Northwest and talking to Lynch about it, it just worked out perfectly. Film history.
Max, you opened the book rejecting the idea of a director. Someone you talked to who was calling the 1984 film campy, right? So rather, you made the case that the movie should be considered a masterpiece. And while I'm sure that there are very many fans who will agree with you, it feels like it is harder to convince general audience of that. So just going back to the 90s for a moment, I was introduced to the Dune books at a really young age, and I was excited to learn, oh, there's a movie about it. So it was a friend's birthday party. He managed to get it as a rental, and we started playing the VHS cassette. And then let me tell you, well before the Arrakis arrival scenes, that room emptied up, and there were just two of us sitting transfixed to the TV screen. And I mean, this is completely anecdotal, but it's funny how many times I've heard similar stories from completely different people. And then, of course, there's the fact that the movie performed poorly when it released in theaters, as we know. So that brings me to my question. Who was the intended target audience for Lynch's Dune in the first place? Was there a clear vision from the director and or studio regarding whom this movie was for? Were they aligned to it?
The short answer is no, they were not aligned. I don't think in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think what got the movie the green light was, you know, they saw the incredible worlds that, you know, Lynch and Bob Ringwood and Tony Masters and all those guys were building from the ground up, and they just said, oh, these could be toys, these could be, you know, bed sheets, these can, you know, this is clearly the next Star Wars. You know, we're gonna do a kind of a hipper, sexier, you know, Star Wars for grown-ups, you know. But it's like, therein lies the rub, you know, like Star Wars, this, you know, yeah, it's Star Wars for grown-ups, you know, like grown-ups don't play with toys, you know, and grown-ups don't, you know, most of them. Yeah, I think, you know, and Lynch, you know, and everybody, you know, I talked to said, you know, like, oh, we weren't thinking about what's toyetic or what's merchandise or what's, you know, kid-friendly, you know, like if they were doing that, clearly they wouldn't have had Baron Harkonnen pulling, you know, nipples out of people, and you know, and any of that stuff. I think, yeah, I mean, I think Lynch was trying to get away with as much as he could within the boundaries of the PG rating. I think it became a PG-13 because the PG-13 rating was invented while the film was in post. He was pushing the envelope of, you know, what he could do within the constraints that he had. And, you know, and I think, you know, Paul M. Salmon talks about how, you know, it was a similar thing with Blade Runner. You know, it's like, you know, they read on the page, oh, it's Ridley Scott and it's flying cars and it's robots, and you know, we're gonna make a fortune. But like, you know, then you know, it's like you see the movie that Ridley made. It's like, no, this is not like, this is not for kids. This is downbeat. This is, you know, and it's the same thing with Dune. Like Dune is just an incredibly complex world. You know, like I think the biggest difference between the Villeneuve version and the Lynch version, you know, and this is not to, you know, negate anything about Villeneuve. It's just, you know, it was just his marching orders. Is I think Villeneuve was trying to do the most popular, you know, 4-quadrant, audience-friendly version of Dune that he could. And I think Lynch's MO was to embrace the foreignness of Dune and the strangeness. You know, everybody who reads the book says, you know, oh, it took me like 60 or 70 pages to even understand what was going on, you know. And yeah, and that's the feeling he was trying to evoke. He's throwing you in media res into this really strange future, and you know, you have to kind of piece it together as you're going or as you rewatch the film over and over again. and that's the beauty of Lynch in general. Lynch is all about creating these puzzle mosaics that that take many viewings to kind of appreciate all the little details, and stuff. Like I remember watching the Arrow Blu-ray, and on one of the commentaries, this guy pointed out this thing. I was like, what? And it's like in the scene where Paul is being attacked by the Hunter Seeker. The Hunter Seeker comes out from a wood panel on his bed, and it comes out from a panel that has an image of a lion. And if you go and look at the Emperor's throne room, he has these lions next to him, and it's like Lynch loves that stuff. He loves that world building, and it's like making those connections. And yeah, I think he was a great choice to make this movie. It's just they needed to give him the support that he needed all the way through. Once you pull that support, once you start pulling that support and trying to turn it into something that it's never going to be, then you wind up with something that's kind of pleases nobody. So but even so, I love the film, and I love what made it into those 2 hours and 17 minutes.
So, Max, you had touched on the merchandising aspect, and like some was appropriate, some wasn't. Simon was introduced to Dune because of the merchandise, so he has a question about that.
I was introduced back in '84, actually. So when you were talking about how they were marketing it as like Star Wars, the next big thing, my parents back in France had kind of like a Big Lots type of store, and their wholesaler was like, you should get some of these action figures. They're going to be big. People are going to love them. It's the next Star Wars. And sadly, no one ever bought any figures, but guess who had a bunch of them? I did. That's how I got introduced to Dune. Yep, this guy. We were talking about the figures, the bed sheets, the coloring book, the infamous coloring book. There was a lot of craziness. I was happy a couple years ago, I found on Etsy, of all places, the read-along record. What are some of your favorite, if you have any or had any, what are some of your favorites? And some of the, I can't believe they made that, or we're going to go in production with that toy, or any merchandise.
Well, I mean, I think everybody's favorite toy from the era has to be the what John DeVore in the book refers to as the ribbed for your pleasure nightmare toy. That is the sandworm. You can't believe that they. I think Mark is running to go get his.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Still.
Oh wow!
It's a disappearing sandworm. There we go.
There it is. The silhouette makes it worse. I'm just gonna say it.
Yeah, people, if you're not watching the video, cue up the video to this point.
Yes.
No, it is safe for work. It might not look it, but it is safe for work.
Yeah, I mean, like that. Yeah, it's incredible that got past. The people were just like, yeah, the kids are gonna love that. It's yeah, and I do want to mention that I bought one of those for a photo spread that's in the book where I just had a bunch of merchandise that I took a photo of, and it's in the book. And I bought a worm, and I will be this is an announcement for this podcast. I will be giving it away at my signing at Forbidden Planet in New York on September 16th, 5 to 7 p.m. I think for everybody that comes, I don't want to make everybody wait for 2 hours, so I'm going to do like whoever comes in the first hour is going to get like a ticket or something. I haven't figured it out exactly, but yeah, I'm going to give my my worm toy away.
It doesn't involve sticking your hand in a box and withstanding pain or anything like that. The competition.
No, that's for the special signing at the at the Benny Gesserit school that I'm doing the week after.
Did you ever collect any of the toys back then, or?
So my thing, obviously, because I'm born in '81, so my big thing was Star Wars, and what's even better than getting the Star Wars toys when they came out was getting them when they were on the remainder bin at KB Toys and Toys R Us and at yard sales and stuff like that. So I spent like probably from like whatever, like 86 to 89, just like hunting down as much Star Wars stuff as I could. And I think I may have gotten like Sardaukars and Baron Harkonnen and a few other ones that just mixed in, like thinking they might have been like random Star Wars figures that I didn't have, and then I found out, oh no, they're from another movie that I had never seen. So yeah, I think I got a few accidentally, but yeah, I don't really collect toys per se. I do love premium scale statues like from Sideshow and places like that. I think those are really cool. And I actually spent a lot of time doing unboxings of stuff like that. Like toys, like figures and stuff. I'm like, if it bends, I'm not really into it. But but no, I think there was lots of cool merchandise. I think that the chapter on merchandising is called Knife Fights on Lunchboxes. I think that says everything you need to know about what was very misguided about the idea of trying to market a film like this. That was like a thing in the 80s though. It was like inappropriate toys, inappropriate children's cartoons. There was like there were children's toys for RoboCop. There were children's toys for Rambo. Like it was just like anything we could market. We don't care if it's an R-rated movie. We don't care if it's like if they could have marketed like the Fly toys to kids, like they would like David Cronenberg's The Fly, like Brundlefly transforms. It's like they would have done it.
Well, I'll tell you one thing: if they ever make a Cronenberg toy collection, I'm getting the James Wood Videodrome pulling out the gun out of his chest.
Yeah, a stretchy TV accessory.
Exactly, each sold separately. But yeah, the 80s were crazy for toys, like Rambo toys. Come on, guys. RoboCop toys.
I spit on your grave toys.
So, Max, you interviewed dozens and dozens of people in the book. Was there any particular person, apart from the person at the end, which we'll get to later, I'm sure? But
the Wizard of Oz, you mean?
Yeah. Was there anybody who was a really surprising get for you, or some revelation from them that you were really surprised to hear?
Well, I mean, I honestly, like every person I got was a shock. Some of them were easier than others to get, and once I got David and Kyle, like it really like snowballed. And I think it was exponential how many people I was getting towards the end. Like, if you saw a chart, it would be like one person every 3 months or something. And then by the end, it was like 12 people in a week or something. It was like, and then, yeah, like, but, and every one of those interviews, I did so much prep, so much research. But I think, a really emotional one, for me was, Alicia Witt, because I talked to her, I think it was like 2 months after her parents tragically died in this really awful thing that just their house wasn't heated adequately for the winter, and they both just froze, and it's just an awful thing. And I came into that interview with a lot of trepidation, because I knew that, because her parents were with her throughout the Dune experience, and that a lot of her memories would be inextricably tied to them, and I didn't want to open up any wounds or make her feel sad or anything. So like I went into that being like, like, is there anything that's like, I'm very sorry about what just happened, like, is there anything that's like a no-go, or that like you just don't want to talk. And she was just like, no, like let's just talk. And and she spoke so fondly of her mom and dad, and and had these great, it was all positive, very warm, wonderful stories from her. And yeah, that was a great one. And yeah, what did you think of her interview in the book?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think she probably had a different perspective than most of the people, because she was 7 at the time of filming, so for her it was a massive playground rather than work. Some of my favorite interviews or interviewees were the presidents of Universal Studios. How did you manage to get them to talk about Dune?
You know what? It kind of shocks me after my experience on this book. It shocks me that more books like this don't talk to executives, because there's this, we're sort of trained to see the director as like the David and the executives as the Goliath. And but it's like the executives are the ones that are actually saying, yes, let's make this movie for this reason, because this person, because we believe in this story or whatever. And Tom Mount and Frank Price were both really smart, really wonderful to talk to, very gave me a lot of time, gave me a lot of honesty, I thought, about their perspectives. Frank came into it late, and Tom was there, I think, more on the earlier side, and so they kind of complement each other very well. And I think and Tom obviously really believed in David. Like, he thought David could direct Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is in hindsight is like, what? But and I think like to get to talk to those guys and get like just the it's been 40 years, they're not stepping on any toes, and it's just like, yeah, they were really honest about what happened, and and how it all kind of fell apart. And like when you hear them talk about it, because like I think the narrative has been like that it was Dino, that Dino was the bad guy, and when you read what actually happened, it's a lot more nuanced than that, right, Mark?
Generally, in the discussions of Lynch's Dune, it's like Lynch was undercut by De Laurentiis's, and some of that blame is passed on to the studio. And you sometimes get interviews from Raffaella or Dino, but the studios have always been this black hole of blame, that all the bad things are pushed up the hill. And it's great to actually get some perspective and some insight on that side of the fence from the production, both on their experience with Dino as a person and from the Dune project.
It would take a long time just to explain kind of what happened, and that's why there's a book. But like
go buy the book.
Go buy the book. But like it's a lot more complicated than I think everybody respected David and wanted to do right by him, but at a certain point the movie just I think the movie overwhelmed everybody. And I think it was Richard Malzahn, the effects guy, said it's a movie that had a huge budget, but what it really needed was unlimited budget. And obviously and then stuff got shortchanged, because like they spent so much up front on sets and actors and all that stuff, and then when they hit the effects, it's like, oh, we're in trouble. But and the effects section, I worked very hard on that. I was like, I really wanted to know what happened between John Dykstra and Raffaella, and you kind of I think you get a really good idea between him and Barry Nolan. I think there's a lot of truth in between the lines of both of those guys. I think Yeah, like Apogee, there's no question that they would have turned in better effects. There's just no question. But
so just a bit of context for anyone not familiar.
Yeah.
Originally, Apogee was meant to do the special effects for David Lynch's Dune, and there was some fallout or disagreement. Go read the book. And Apogee left, leaving Raffaele De Laurentiis with no visual effects crew to do this visual effects movie.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the foreground miniatures that were done by
Emilio.
Emilio's work was done during production when they still had dough, and it was all in camera. There were no opticals involved, and so those shots are the best effect shots in the film still, because they haven't dated at all. Like in a couple of them you can tell they're little tiny puppet people, but like for the most part you're just like, wow, like this is so integrated, this is so all the ships with all the vast armies in front of them, like it's just amazing stuff.
For people who don't know, some of the miniatures were hung directly in front of the camera. So the camera is shooting through the miniature, and then there'd be a little doorway cut out or a hole, and you'd then see the live action people possibly hundreds of feet away, but they're in scale to lots of little tiny figures on the model. And so it doesn't need to go off to be optically composited or printed or special effects or anything. What you're seeing through the lens is what you see on the silver screen when it's projected. Absolutely incredible work.
If you look at the book, like you can see, like, some of those quote unquote miniatures were still huge.
Yes.
and supposedly were just like kind of left dangling on this Churubusco Studios when they were done with them. They're just like getting rained on and stuff. It's really fun to talk to a lot of these people, and I mean, like I have favorites. Obviously, like Bob Ringwood, I think, is very open and very honest. And I was grateful for that. And he was, and he does not do many interviews, and and he had a bad experience on the film, and he still harbors a lot of resentment, and which he says in the interview.
Yeah, his personality came through on those oral interviews very clearly, I think.
Yeah,
one of the most distinct voices among the interviews.
Not like mean, like not like nasty or catty about anything, just like very blunt and very honest. And and he couldn't have been nicer to me. I was very, very happy to meet Bob. The only person I did an in real life interview for this book was Bill Sienkiewicz, the guy who the guy who drew the Marvel Dune adaptation in 1984.
Yeah, and speaking of the oral histories, I think that's such an enjoyable format. I've used it as well about like getting all the interviews and like putting them together into one narrative. I felt it really made the book flow, and you get all the different perspectives at the right time. So I enjoyed that aspect.
The difference between the book at 8 months and the book at 2 years is like, that's a big difference. Like it shifted to oral history more than a year into the writing process. Like, because when I only had 7 or 8 interviews, they were just going to be dropped into the book, and then when I realized I had enough to do an oral history, it was like a game changer.
Yeah, thinking back to my experience with the film at a young age, I really didn't give much thought to differences between Lynch's films and Herbert's novels. But as I've read the books more and more often, and I've watched newer adaptation, including the 2021 movie, I'm increasingly cognizant of the additions and like some of the changes. But like I think for me, it's not like some of the visual things, like I don't know, like the weird modules or things. For me, I think the biggest thing is the overall theme of the movie. That brings one of my burning questions is we know that Herbert was involved in the creation of Lynch's Dune. So I'm really curious, knowing that Herbert's key theme is, talking about the danger of charismatic leaders, and making Dune more as a warning. What happens if, you give this person too much power, and like how it can corrupt them. But that really didn't make it into Lynch's film. Like, what are your thoughts? Do you have any theories on that?
I'm not sure if that was an edict from the De Laurentises, or if that was Lynch just not being interested in that kind of nuance or shade of gray to the character. I know that he shot, I've seen some deleted scenes of Paul having like a nightmare and being like, turning them into killing machines, my terrible purpose, and that didn't even make it into the Spice Diver edit. And but so he shot that, and I think his, if you read some of the different endings that were in some of the different drafts of the scripts, like they vary very wildly about what he's trying to kind of say with the film, like what's his ultimate kind of thesis for the film. And I think that idea of Paul, causing more trouble than he does helping. I think maybe that would have carried into the sequel. Was telling me the other day, like, there's a part in one of the books where Paul is like, do you remember Adolf Hitler? Do you ever heard of him? Like, they got so mad at him just for killing 6 million people. Like, I've killed billions of people. It's like, yeah, like, Paul's a monster. And in the books, and he's a reluctant monster. And I think Denis Villeneuve is obviously leaning way more into that. I don't know if he's going to carry through. We'll see. But, I think maybe in 1984, that might not have flown. It's also, if you're going to do this as a franchise, that's kind of interesting, to set up Paul as, really set it up as a triumphant ending. And then to, segue into a sequel where you see like, things are not kind of going as swimmingly as Princess Irulan says they are in the voiceover at the end. She's just like, and everything was great after that. Bye.
And they lived happily ever after. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so yeah, I think it's partly because it's not that I didn't have the opportunity to ask people about that. It's just some people don't remember, or they conveniently don't remember. Like I know Raffaello is like, did it rain at the end of the movie? I'm like, yeah, it rains at the end of the movie. It's, I think but that whole idea of treating Paul as a genuine messiah, and treating the film as a kind of a spiritual journey to enlightenment, to fulfilling, all your innermost abilities. That speaks much more to David Lynch's belief system, and the transcendental meditation and all that kind of stuff, which we get into a lot, especially towards the end of the book.
That was interesting hearing that interview right at the end with David Lynch, and yeah, he was really graceful. I liked how he talked about how he was grateful for all the people that he had worked with, and how all of them had done such a great job, and he talked about the transcendental meditation and how that got him through a really rough time of filming the movie. So how exactly do you think his beliefs got reflected into the final film?
Well, it's. I think towards the end, I actually used two kind of opposing quotes, do the right thing style. I have Frank Herbert, basically saying, it's a book about, politics and the politics of power and power corrupting, and and then David Lynch is like, oh, it's about a spiritual journey and awakening and all this stuff. It's like very different perspectives on the same material, and it's so interesting that the film is so true to the book, except for like the main theme of the book. and I mean, like I don't know how you do an adaptation this pure and also this divergent. It's kind of a hat trick almost. And yeah, but yeah, David Lynch, like he was very very devoted to the Maharishi and transcendental meditation, not to crap on that, that's his beliefs. I'm just saying, like, he clearly believes in charismatic leaders, and Herbert clearly doesn't. And yeah, and then and I mean, like, and then that gets into like the tricky thing about, like, well, what are the politics of Frank Herbert? What are the politics of David Lynch? And I mean, like, they're murky. They're really murky, both of them. I mean, like, Frank Herbert's, I think Frank Herbert supported Reagan. Lynch supported Reagan also, but like Lynch is so like kind of naive, almost like childlike, apolitical. I think he just bought into the image that Reagan projected. But like, like Lynch is not a consistent conservative at all. I think a lot of conservatives try to, use the fact that he voted for Reagan as like, claiming him kind of. But like, no, he's voted for Democrats. He's voted for libertarians. He's voted for the Transcendental Meditation Party. I mean, yeah, he's. I would call him much more of a left-leaning libertarian in his politics. But I don't think any of that is. I don't think any of those kinds of politics are really reflected in the film. I think that the film is much more just kind of about Shakespearean intrigue and balance of power and the spiritual journey of Paul. I think that's what really interested David, much more than doing kind of the Luke Skywalker thing for Return of the Jedi, which he was offered. I think this was much more up his alley.
Max, were there any Dune myths that you went into this book wanting to bust, or were there any myths that actually turned out to be true?
A lot of things turned out to be true, and a lot of things turned out to have a lot more nuance, I think, than as we discussed earlier. But what's something I really wanted to get to the bottom of the whole apogee thing. Like, the apogee thing was really like, I worked a long time to try to get John, and John was very cool to talk to me, and I think like there's, it's still not completely clear what happened there. I mean, like, yeah, I've seen now some memos from the time. It gets confusing. I mean, I think what it really comes down to is like, I think they had a lot of expectations for what they wanted to get on the screen, and the dollar amounts maybe weren't adding up, and I think that was a frustration for everybody. And then in terms of I mean, I was really fascinated to learn about Sid Sheinberg's involvement in post-production of that he was really the one who was Sid Sheinberg being the head of the chairman of MCA at the time. And he was really the one who was involved in getting all scissor hands with the movie, and that was his MO. Sid Sheinberg, he's well known for shepherding Steven Spielberg's career and for having a lot of hits for the company, but he also had a very bad reputation for greenlighting movies, from really good directors like Terry Gilliam, Ridley Scott, and then when they turn in the film, and it's not the kind of movie that's going to make its budget back, then rather than just accept it for what it is, Sid was the kind of guy who thought he could make lemons out of lemon, make lemonade out of lemons. He was really making lemons out of lemonade, So yeah, he got very chop happy with Legend, Ridley Scott's movie, yeah. And he tried to do the same thing to Terry Gilliam's Brazil and that movie, and then Terry kind of went around him and made him look like an idiot. David did two very different movies. For his first two movies, he did Eraserhead, which is very strange, very abstract, very, surreal, nightmare vision. And then he did Elephant Man, which is, has some of those elements, but is much more uplifting, more positive, more mainstream movie, mainstream biopic. And I think people saw those two things and just thought they could read whatever they wanted into the tea leaves. And, and then, it's like, it's only in hindsight when you see the rest of his filmography that you're like, oh no, like that's not David. David can't do Fast Times at Ridgemont High. David can't do Star Wars. Nor would you want him to.
16 years after David Lynch's Dune came out in theaters, we got the sci-fi miniseries, considered to be faithful to the books, yet suffered from really poor production values. And now we have Villeneuve's two-part adaptation that has seen a financial and critical success. Thinking back to Lynch's version, which element of the movie do you feel really stands the test of time and is least likely to be surpassed by these or future adaptations?
Well, I think everybody says this, but the look of the film, and I mean that in every capacity, just, the production design, the costumes, and even to the way the story is told in the very kind of nonlinear way that, Lynch weaves an already complicated story. He makes it, instead of making it clearer, he makes it more complicated, more visually complex, and more dreamy. And I think that's unsurpassed. You can't do better than that in terms of visualizing what's on the page. I've heard so many people say that, like, they wish that, like, somebody else would remake Dune but keep everything the way it looked in Lynch's version. And and a lot of people have even said that, like, clearly some of what Lynch visualized leaked into the Villeneuve films. I personally find the Villeneuve films a little drab, a little one note in visually. I think everything is kind of these Ansel Adams compositions, these wide compositions and these brutalist backgrounds. And I really love the way that Lynch made all four worlds that are in the film distinct, to the point where whether you're on Arrakis or you're on Caladan, like, where you are instantly. And that is the real. You could frame any of these images from the movie and put them in a museum. Like, they're beautiful.
Max, it's been a blast having you on Dune Talk and getting these new insights into Lynch's Dune. Before we close out, where can people find out about more about you and more about the book? And are there any other upcoming projects you'd like people to know about?
Sure. So, I mean, I am on the social media venue formerly known as Prince. That's what I refer to it as. I think you know the one I'm talking about. I'm on there. It's just my name. And then I'm on Instagram, Max Evry 1. And my Instagram is entirely devoted to the book. There's nothing else but the book stuff. And yeah, so if you want, lots of fun quotes and details and, or you want to know about upcoming events relating to it, or like when reviews come out or when excerpts come out, like go to the Instagram. And I have a number of audio commentaries coming out in the coming months. I just did, for a company called Via Vision, I did the Prophecy trilogy from the 90s. I don't know if you remember that, with Christopher Walken as a murderous angel. And I did, for Arrow, I did Michael Mann's Black Hat, another very flawed movie from a visionary director. I did an audio commentary on that, and that's coming out, I believe, in November. It's been delayed a few times, but they delayed it to add the director's cut. So if you like Michael Mann, I think there's probably some Michael Mann and David Lynch overlap. David Lynch actually almost directed Manhunter instead of Dune. I think he picked Dune over Red Dragon. But yeah, so that's all good stuff. And then we've got a lot more fun things that are going to be debuting in regards to the book in the coming months. I know I have a cool video that's going to be showing up on a website pretty soon, so keep your eye on that. I mean, one of the things from Mark's review is like he wished that there were more pictures in the book, and a lot of that was just logistic. It's like we had a wealth of material, but like it was about keeping the length to a certain length, and it was also about so there were certain things that we just weren't sure we could clear.
My precious Fae, take your brother to Arrakis and destroy the Atreides. Hey guys, sorry I got sidetracked. Please follow me on social media if you like. As Dowdy, Max, it was a pleasure meeting you, and I'm jealous to everyone that's going to New York. Gets to meet you and possibly win a sandworm.
Well, it's great to be back on Dune Talk, talking Lynch's Dune for a change. Thanks very much for having me on. Max, it's been a pleasure to talk to you once again. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and looking forward to seeing your future work.
Yeah, same, buddy. Yeah, and Mark made a few contributions to the book as well. Like he helped me with there's a whole section about comparing the book to the movie, and we worked on that together, and that was a lot of fun. I think one of the reviews actually singled it out as being one of their favorite sections. So thank you for that. I was really
I thought it was the worst section myself,
Yeah, and in case you didn't hear before, I will be at Forbidden Planet in New York on September 16th from 5 to 7 p.m. and I will be giving away my sandworm toy. So please come to that. If you're in or near New York, I would love to meet you. I would love to sign your book. You can get the book there ahead of its release on September 19th.
Right. Thanks again, Max. So great to have you on the show. And I've learned a couple of really cool things out of this episode and the book itself. So this was Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and you can find me writing at DuneNewsNet and on Twitter and Instagram at Marcus is Writing. And let us know. We're going to have a couple more interviews in the coming months. So who would you like to see on future episodes of Dune Talk? For now, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.